Orochimaru is known for a lot of things. Moral and gender ambiguity, snake-like tendencies, a weird fixation on people with red eyes, and most likely, more than anything, a litany of human experimentation. However, have you ever sat down and thought about every single one of the experiments that we ever saw come to fruition from Orochimaru? No? You haven't? Well, that's what you have me for. See, because while Orochimaru is a prevalent character throughout the entirety of Naruto's 700-chapter run, and even being a prevalent character in Boruto, being the creator of both Log and Mitsuki, if you told me prior to me doing the research for this video, that over the course of Naruto, on the low end, mind you, that is to say, not taking borderline experimentations or anime-only experimentations, that we see 18 human experimentations come to fruition from Orochimaru, I would say you're lying, because that is an absurdly high number, and yet, that's reality. Over the course of Naruto, if you count Team Dosu, which is technically 3 people, as one person, we are introduced to 18, or 20 if you count all the individual members of Team Dosu, people that have been augmented in some way by Orochimaru. However, who amongst them is the most impressive, the strongest, the most changed? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking all of Orochimaru's human experiments, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional video a week and 46 episodes ready to go, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. So before we head into this rather arduous ranking, I'd like to set some ground rules. So we're not going to be ranking Orochimaru's experiments just through the metric of how strong they are. Well, that would be one way we could go about it. If we're being entirely real with ourselves, some of Orochimaru's experiments, he barely did anything for. A lot of the people that came into Orochimaru's care either got a curse mark or even less. And while almost everybody who's been associated with the Sound Village in any capacity has some kind of crazy ability, a lot of those people had those abilities before they had anything to do with Orochimaru. And therefore, while strength is going to be taken into account here, on top of taking strength into account, we're also going to be taking into account rather heavily how much work Orochimaru did on this person. If Orochimaru created you, you're going to be higher up on the human experimentation side than if Orochimaru just put windpipes in your hand. I mean, there's also the benefit that the better that Orochimaru got at experiments, the stronger their experiments got, and therefore the experiments that popped up later in Naruto's story usually ended up being some of the stronger experiments. However, with all of that said, let's get into our list, because coming in at last place, at the number 18 spot on our list of every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Karin. Oh, Nick, Karin's a full-blooded Uzumaki. She has some of the highest chakra levels we've ever seen in all of Naruto. How could you put her in last place? You're right, she is all those things. Karin, for being entirely real with ourselves, is kind of broken. In fact, Karin's so powerful that she's kind of our measuring stick for all the things that the Uzumaki were supposedly able to do. Not only does Karin have such abundant and overflowing chakra reserves that simply biting her is enough to not only rejuvenate you, but also refill so much chakra in your body that somebody like Tsunade is able to refill the entirety of their strength of 100 seal, but Karin has also displayed the ability to use things like the Mind's Eye of the Kagura, an ability that was apparently specific to the Uzumaki that allows for them to open their third eye by closing their other two, that allows for them to use a Byakugan-esque skill that makes it not only possible for them to see dozens of kilometers away, but also track chakra signatures, see through walls, tell if people are related, or even go so far as to tell if people are lying. You know, essentially an upgraded version of the Byakugan that for some reason the Uzumaki had access to. Tie that into the fact that during the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, she showed us that she had the ability to use adamantite chains, though not at the level of Kushina, to destroy a mini wood golem being used by Tobi, which is actually just Yamato wrapped in a white zetsu. And yeah, Karin is probably one of the most slept on, powerful people in the entirety of the Naruto universe. Realistically, she's probably top 20, top 25 most powerful ninja ever in Naruto. But as to how Orochimaru experimented on Karin to make her stronger, we don't know. Orochimaru does, yes, refer to Karin as one of their good experiments, and supposedly had so much faith in all the experiments that they had done on Karin that Orochimaru decided that Karin should be the warden of their southern prison, as Orochimaru understood with Karin in charge that nobody would be able to escape. And while it's probably somewhat safe to assume that things like the Mind's Eye of the Kagura, her adamantite chains, or even her chakra overabundance were probably strengthened while with Orochimaru, we have no evidence to substantiate any of those claims. And in fact, we know that Karin was being used in a healing capacity against her will before Orochimaru even found her, and therefore the most prevalent part of her kit it, the fact that you can bite her to be rejuvenated existed before she interfaced with Orochimaru in the slightest. Tie that into the fact that we know that at least women from the Uzumaki clan, but most likely everybody from the Uzumaki clan, had access to the adamantite chains, and Karin's access to the adamantite chains didn't even sniff Kushina's, and the idea that either Orochimaru A, gave Karin access to the adamantite chains, or B, strengthened her access to the adamantite chains seems unlikely. Tie that into the fact that she does not have a curse seal, and well, yes, we know that Orochimaru experimented on Karin in some way. As to how that some way affected her, we can't say. So while yes, Karin is ridiculously strong, unfortunately we don't know how much of that strength can be accredited to Orochimaru, and thus she gets our last place spot. However, the same cannot be said for our number 17 spot, because coming up at number 17 on our ranking of every single one of Orochimaru's human experimentations, we have Team Dosu. Yeah, I'm putting them all together. Now, Team Dosu, which is comprised of Dosu, Zaku, and Kin, three young ninja from the Sound Village that partake in the Chunin exams, are some of the first Orochimaru human experiments that we ever see. And even though they are probably the weakest experiments that Orochimaru ever displays to us, the viewer, in the time and the place that they existed, they were uniquely powerful. See, Team Dosu was strong. They just had a uniquely unfortunate run in terms of the Chunin exam. In the Forest of Death, they were able to display their strength in a victorious battle against Rock Lee and Sakura. They were easily able to dispatch of Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino, and it wasn't until a bloodthirsty first time using Curse Seal Sasuke awoke and started battling against them that things started to turn for the worse for them. However, almost every single Chunin involved in the Forest of Death probably would have lost in a battle against a bloodthirsty first time using Curse Seal Sasuke, except for like Neji or Gaara. And then in the preliminary matches, Zaku with two broken arms from his fight against Sasuke had to battle against Shino, who was probably the fourth strongest genin in the exams, and Kin had to battle against Shikamaru, who was probably like top 6. Now Dosu does get an easy fight against Choji, however Dosu then does make the mistake of challenging Gaara to a fight during a full moon and getting squished to death, which I guess is technically a better fate than Zaku or Kin get because they get killed to be used as Edo Tensei bodies for Tobirama and Hashirama. But like we know the powerful augmentations that Orochimaru did to every single member of Team Dosu, like putting wind blasting air pipes in Zaku's palms that allowed for him to fire wind-style breakthrough-esque bursts of air that were supposedly strong enough to level entire city blocks. Orochimaru also equipped Dosu with sound wave generating gauntlets that were able to attack the inner ear of anybody that Dosu came into combat with, knocking them off their balance or knocking out their hearing. Something that allowed for Dosu to completely overwhelm Rock Lee in a battle of taijutsu. And considering the fact that Rock Lee was almost able to defeat Gaara with just taijutsu, that's a pretty impressive feat. And as for what Orochimaru did for Kin, I don't better genjutsu. There's a rather prevalent theory amongst the Naruto community that everybody on Team Dosu, including Orochimaru, hates Kin. And unfortunately, I think that might be true because I have no idea what Orochimaru did to her. I'm gonna say increased her sound-based genjutsu abilities, but like they weren't even that good to begin with. So like, who knows? The majority of the heavy lifting being done here is Zaku and Dosu. However, on account of the fact that they only got physical augmentations to their body or possibly to their jutsus and nothing like an additional arm or a curse seal, I have to put Team Dosu at 17. However, it's at number 16 that we start to see the curse seals come into play because at number 16 on our list of ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have probably the weakest user of the curse seal ever, Anko. Now, Anko's had a lot of her kit, at least influenced by Orochimaru. Mostly on account of the fact that when Anko was a genin, she was a part of Team Orochimaru. That is to say that Orochimaru was her jonin. And because she showed a fair amount of promise, Orochimaru actually taught her the majority of their signature jutsus. And in the anime, what Orochimaru knew about achieving immortality, though this never happens in the manga. Now, because Anko showed a fair bit of promise, meant she could shoot out snakes from her arms just like good old Orochimaru decided to use her in their preliminary test of the curse seal. And out of the 10 people that Orochimaru placed this curse seal on, Anko was the only survivor, making Anko the first ever user of the Curse Seal of Heaven. However, after awaking from receiving the Curse Seal of Heaven, we learned, in the anime at least, that Anko refused to do any more work for Orochimaru, and thus Orochimaru had to erase her memory because he didn't want to kill her because of how valuable of a research subject she was, and thus she bared a grudge against Orochimaru for forever. Now, with all that said, it seems fairly obvious as to why we never see Anko use the Curse Seal. However, on account of the fact that Orochimaru did place a Curse Seal on her, and it did take, and the fact that Anko was able to learn his hidden snake hands technique, and the twin snakes mutual death technique, which is a murder-suicide technique where you wrap yourself up in snakes with the person that you want to kill. That operates kind of like the Reaper Death Seal, except minus, the death god. And yeah, Anko is pretty powerful, and yes, she was highly augmented by Orochimaru, and thus she gets our number 16 spot. But get used to the idea of curse seal users, because there's a lot of them, including our number 15 spot, because coming up at number 15 in our ranking of every single one of Orochimaru's human experimentations, we have Jirobo. Yes, Jirobo is the first member of the Sound Village 5 we're going to be talking about today. And that's because, well, he's the weakest. Oh, Nick, what do you mean? Choji had to eat the tricolored pills, which made him supposedly 100 times stronger than he was before in order to beat Jirobo. Yeah, I know, I've seen the memes as well. But he lost to Choji, when other members of the Sound Village 5 lost to Neji, a once-in-a-generation genius of the Byakugan, the combined forces of Kankuro and Kiba, the combined forces of Shikamaru and Tamari, and the combined forces of Rock Lee, Gaara, and Naruto, and still technically kind of would have won if their body didn't give out. I don't care that Choji took a pill that supposedly should have killed him that gave him access to 100 times his regular strength. Jirobo is the weakest out of the Sound Village 5. Now, yes, he is the physically strongest out of the Sound Village 5, and his strength is at least Jonin level, and the combination of his taijutsu with his ninjutsu makes him a formidable foe for basically anybody. Now, Jirobo's kit revolves around two things: his superhuman strength and his ability to drain the chakra from those who are interacting with his earth constructs. And thus, Jirobo is known for using his earth release to try and capture enemies so he could slowly but surely drain out all their chakra. More than that, Jirobo has shown the ability to summon an earth golem that can not only absorb the chakra of those it's battling against, but also reconstruct itself if it's destroyed. So what did Orochimaru do for Jirobo? Well, the simple answer is a curse seal. See, Jirobo is not only able to access the first level of a curse seal, but also the second level. And in both of these scenarios, on account of the fact that he is accessing a curse seal, he is able to receive senjutsu chakra created by Orochimaru. And thus, by accessing either of these levels of the curse seal, Jirobo is, in a sense, accessing a form of Sage Mode. And this boost in strength by pulling in senjutsu chakra allows for Jirobo to go from a person who's able to lift a gigantic boulder over his head with two hands in his base form to somebody who's able to lift a mountain-sized version of Choji with just one hand. And thus, by accessing either the version 1 or version 2 states of his curse seal, Jirobo is able to undergo a massive upgrade in strength. However, it appears as though that Jirobo's entire kit does kind of just boil down to strength given to him by Orochimaru, which to me is less impressive than a lot of the other things that we've seen given to other members of the Sound Village 5, which is why Jirobo gets our number 15 spot. And why, at number 14 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Kidomaru. Kidomaru is just objectively cooler, stronger, and has more experiments done to his body by Orochimaru. See, because not only does Kidomaru, like every other member of the Sound Village 5, have a curse seal that he's able to access up to level 2, but Kidomaru's got 6 arms. And I'm telling you right now, he wasn't born with 6 arms. And like, as impractical as 6 arms may sound to you, in a ninja world where you're trying to fire a bow, hold a kunai, and fight a guy all simultaneously, having 6 arms is kind of massive. Especially when the majority of the powers in your universe revolve around creating hand seals. Yeah, Kidomaru can have 3 separate hand seals going at any given moment. He can also use 3 arms to pull back the bowstring of his bow, increasing the tension and therefore the firing power of his arrow. But more than just having 8 appendages, Kidomaru also has a 3rd eye, and that 3rd eye increases the precision of his arrow shots substantially, allowing him to exactly pinpoint not only where the vitals on an enemy are, but how to strike them from a distance. I mean, with his 3rd eye, he literally notes that he missed his target by 15 centimeters from 50 meters away. And listen, here's the thing. We don't know how many like spider-based jutsus Kidomaru had before working with Orochimaru. It's probably fairly safe to assume that he like maybe had an interest in spiders and Orochimaru was like, oh, you're gonna like spiders when I'm done with you. And if we do assume that all the spider abilities of Kidomaru do tie their roots back to Orochimaru in some way or the other, then we have to talk about the fact that A, Kidomaru has access to a gigantic summoning spider that's able to lay a sack of eggs that drops thousands of fist-sized spiders on an enemy, slowly but surely overwhelming them, unless of course they're able to slow down time and stab them all out of the air. He's able to create spider webs from either his saliva or his sweat that can bind, trap, or sense enemies. He can chew his spider webs in his mouth to make weapons like the arrows that he fires, and he can release his spider web-like fluid from his sweat pores to cover his body in a hardened golden material, completely defending him not only from physical attacks, but thrown attacks and even chakra-boosted attacks. this. So yeah, I would say that not only is Kidomaru stronger than Jirobo, I would also say that they got a fair amount more from Orochimaru than Jirobo did. However, I still think he comes up short when compared to our number 13 spot, because at 13 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Tayuya. Now, unfortunately with Tayuya, the augmentations done to her body aren't quite as obvious as the augmentations done to Kidomaru. Yes, we know that she was uniquely powerful before Orochimaru even started working with her, on account of the fact that every single member of the Sound Village 4 had to survive a battle royale against a bunch of other prisoners in order to prove their strength to be selected as Orochimaru's bodyguards, but we don't see that battle. We just know that Tayuya is the winner of her respective battle royale. However, we do know that Tayuya is the second strongest member of the Sound Village 4, only under Sakon and Ukon. And they're two people, so that's kind of cheating if we're being honest. And honestly, this claim is believable, because Tayuya has access to a specific set of abilities that are kind of unique in the Naruto world. Sound-based genjutsu, a type of abilities that has proven itself time and time again to be one of the most broken types of abilities in the Naruto universe. And her sound-based genjutsu is all funneled through her demonic flute, a flute that she could use for two very different techniques. See, Tayuya was not only able to catch those who heard the playings of her demonic flute and a genjutsu so complete that people believed that their bones were melting, but also Tayuya was able to make up for the fact that she herself wasn't all that skilled in terms of close quarter combat by summoning three beings known as Doki. And these Doki are controlled through the playings of Tayuya. Now, not only are these summonings massive and uniquely powerful, but they were also able to control a spectral worm that came out of their body that could absorb the physical energy of anybody it came into contact with. And by accessing the level 2 version of her curse mark, she was able to achieve a level of strength, speed, endurance, and range that made it all but impossible for Shikamaru to take her on 1v1, resulting in Tamari literally needing to fly in, summon a weasel with a sickle, and cut down an entire forest to kill her. So for those reasons, and those reasons alone, Tayuya gets our number 13 spot. But Tayuya is not the strongest member of the Sound Village 4, and definitely not the strongest member of the Sound Village 5. But then again, neither is a number 12 spot, because coming up at number 12 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Sakon and Ukon. They want to be one person, but boy oh boy were they probably not before they met Orochimaru. See, obviously, yes, Sakon and Ukon are two separate people, and Sakon and Ukon both separately received curse seals from Orochimaru. Now, while level 1 and level 2 of this curse seal allow for Sakon and Ukon to do all of the crazy things that it does for everybody else, it changes how their bodies look, they get stronger, faster, have higher endurance, so on and so forth. Sakon and Ukon also get one of the most broken abilities in all of Naruto through their level 2 transformation. See, because when Sakon and Ukon access the second level of their curse seal, they are able to rearrange their body on a molecular level, which not only allows for them to augment their body in literally any way they want, but also it allows for them to enter the body of their opponents and then just begin constructing or deconstructing their body at will. However, there is one drawback with this technique, and it is that any damage that body incurs while they're inside of it, Sakon and Ukon also occur. But still, the second that Sakon or Ukon get into your body, they should be able to rather effectively kill you. And thus, Orochimaru granting them a curse seal that allowed for them to melt their bodies, essentially, is kind of crazy. Now, the reason that they access this ability to break down their body on a molecular level is probably because Sakon and Ukon were maybe born with a Kekkei Genkai that allowed for them to fuse into each other's bodies, which the two of them usually use so that Ukon could just remain asleep inside of Sakon's body, and Ukon would then let Sakon use all of his limbs so that Sakon could throw 3-armed or 3-leg punches or kicks. Not to mention that Sakon and Ukon were also shown to have the ability to summon the Rashomon gates, which they obviously learned from Orochimaru. And as the Rashomon gates are some of the strongest defensive jutsu in all of Naruto, that's a pretty impressive thing to learn. So while yes, Sakon and Ukon might have had the ability to pop into each other's body before Orochimaru got their slimy little snake hands on them, Orochimaru essentially gave them Overhaul's quirk, allowing them, by accessing the power of their curse seal, to break down and reconstruct their body on a molecular level. Tie that into the fact that they were the strongest out of the Sound Village 4, and yeah, they're gonna get our number 12 spot. But speaking of people who can reconstitute and break down their body, coming up at number 11 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Suigetsu. If we're truly being real, he probably shouldn't be this high on the list. Yeah, he's undoubtedly stronger than any individual member of the Sound Village 4. Suigetsu is beating Kidomaru, Jirobo, Sakon or Ukon, or Tayuya in a fight, probably. But in terms of what Orochimaru did to Suigetsu, we Can't really say. Kind of like with Karin. That's kind of like how every member of Hebi or Taka works. Like Orochimaru didn't really have them around so they could make them stronger. He abducted them because they had powerful abilities and he wanted to learn how to replicate. Thus Orochimaru kind of just kept Suigetsu in a water tank and experimented on him so that they could figure out how to replicate the Hozuki hydrification technique, which obviously Suigetsu was born with on account of the fact that he's a Hozuki, and every other Hozuki we've ever seen has had the hydrification technique. Ties into the fact that he's from the Hidden Mist and from what is essentially the royal clan of the Hidden Mist, the Hozuki clan, and Suigetsu being incredibly practiced in water release is probably something that he was also born with. Also take into account the fact that Mongetsu Hozuki, Suigetsu's older brother, was an extremely practiced Kenjutsu user and probably one of the greatest Kenjutsu users of all time, and the fact that Suigetsu is so good with swords is also probably kind of like a bloodline thing. So how did Orochimaru help Suigetsu? I don't know, put him on a team with Sasuke? Because he doesn't have a curse seal. He probably shouldn't have been this high. I mean, he is the strongest person we talked about up until this moment, so like that's why he is this high, but yeah, Hebi and Taka are weird. But fortunately for you and me, I guess we're not quite done with Hebi/Taka. Because coming up at our number 10 spot, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Jugo. Well, Jugo is the reason that the curse seal exists in the first place. See, because Jugo comes from a clan of people that passively absorb nature energy. And in order to replicate this ability for the standard person to be able to pull in nature energy, Orochimaru took Jugo in and actually created the curse seal by injecting Jugo's blood into other people, giving regular people who naturally wouldn't have the ability to pull in Senjutsu chakra the ability to do so by tapping into the Kekkei Genkai of Jugo's clan. However, because every single person who's ever received a curse seal is kind of just a copy of Jugo, curse seal users are actually pretty consistently weaker than Jugo, as they're only able to transform into 2 separate forms. However, Jugo has a litany of transformations that he's able to use in specific situations to fit whatever he needs, whether that be rocket-propelled arms, an entire Sage Mode transformation that allows him to fly using rocket propulsion, wings, blades on his arms, or even cannons that can fire nature energy. Jugo is basically able to do anything with his body, something that cannot be said for every user of the curse seal. And with these powers, Jugo has shown some crazy abilities, like the ability to dodge a lightning-enhanced lariat from the 4th Raikage, one of the fastest people in the Naruto universe. And as Jugo is constantly pulling in massive amounts of chakra, he's also able to share his flesh and blood with people, especially curse seal users, in order to heal them. However, when he does this, it does take away from his overall size and it makes him younger. However, he's able to take back those cells and turn back into his adult form after those people no longer need his boost in chakra. Now, as for what technically Orochimaru did do for Jugo, we can't really say. Yes, obviously Jugo's existence in Orochimaru's life was incredibly advantageous for Orochimaru in the creation of the curse seal, but there's really no way for us to say that Jugo derived anything from the time that he spent with Orochimaru, except for maybe some stabilization. See, because it's a well-known fact that members of Jugo's clan often rampage after pulling in too much nature energy, because the overload of nature energy makes them lose their mind, but it also overwhelms their body with strength, something that doesn't really happen to Jugo anymore, most likely because of some stabilization experimentations that he underwent under the care of Orochimaru. But enough about Hebi and Taka and all these non-curse seal users. Let's get back to people who have obvious and certifiable advantages given to them by Orochimaru, like our number 9 spot. Because coming up at number 9 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Kimimaro. Now, yes, I know what a lot of you are going to say, but Nick, Kimimaro was born with Shikatsumiyaku. Orochimaru's really got nothing to do with that family-born Kaguya clan Kekkei Genkai. And you're right, Orochimaru is not the reason that Kimimaro is able to rip his bones out of his body. And just because I know some people are going to say it, yes, I know he's red. We're dealing with it. But we'd be lying to ourselves if we said that the curse seal of Orochimaru didn't make Kimimaro Shikatsumiyaku a lot stronger. See, technically, Kimimaro is the only wielder of the curse seal of Earth that we know of in Naruto. Now, what's the difference between the curse seal of heaven and the curse seal of earth? Well, one's on Kimimaro. Now, obviously, like with all of the curse sealed users, both level 1 and level 2 gave Kimimaro some crazy physical advantages. They made him stronger, made the amount of bone that he was able to manipulate from his body larger. However, rather interestingly, Kimimaro's curse seal kind of operated a little bit differently from everybody else's. See, because, well, yes, level 1 of his transformation made him faster and stronger and more durable, and it was stated that the curse seal was specifically placed on him in order to stabilize the chakra disease that he had. Level 2 of Kimimaro's transformation actually made him slower. Now, that wasn't necessarily the worst thing on account of the fact that level 2 of his transformation made him massively more powerful, to the point where with his bone constructs, he was able to blow through Gaara's sand defenses, something that he previously couldn't do with his level 1 transformation. But Kimimaro is pretty much the only person we know whose level 2 transformation doesn't make him faster. However, when you're battling against somebody with some of the fastest defenses in the entire universe, sometimes strength is more important than speed. On top of the massive boost in strength, Kimimaro Kimimimaru's skin also becomes substantially tougher and harder after undergoing his level 2 transformation, which made it impossible for somebody like Gaara to penetrate through it, meaning he had an almost impregnable defense that was just his body. And what's worse for the people fighting against him is that even if you were able to punch through his hardened skin and steel-like bones, Kimimaro in his version 2 transformation gets a healing factor, and a pretty significant one, as it's displayed that when he undergoes his level 2 transformation in his battle against Gaara, that all of his previous wounds heal almost instantly. And therefore, while Kimimaro was always destined to be uniquely powerful as the inheritor of Shikatsu, his level 2 transformation, which was technically his undoing, made him more powerful than Gaara, as he was able to survive the strongest things that Gaara could throw at him, like a sand burial. And to this date, I still believe the biggest sand burial that Gaara ever tries. But ultimately, it was the strain of the Cursed Seal that killed Kimimaro, and Kimimaro wasn't technically created by Orochimaru. And while the Cursed Seal was said to stabilize Kimimaro and was a big source of his power, I don't think, unfortunately, he has the ability to hold a candle to our number 8 spot. Because coming up at number 8 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Log. Oh, Nick, Log wouldn't stand a chance in a battle against Kimimaro. Yeah, that's probably not true. Log's literally a clone of the strongest iteration of Orochimaru we've ever seen. And yeah, he's not a perfect snake sage like Mitsuki, but he's still a clone of Orochimaru. And even though all of the battles that Log did have against Orochimaru were technically a ruse to get Mitsuki to buy into the idea of becoming a perfect snake sage, Log has been shown to go toe-to-toe with the likes of Orochimaru, and Log's abilities are sick. His armor reader technique allows for him to augment the shape and size of his armor, using it to aid his kenjutsu, allowing for him to deflect sword strikes, launch attacks, or even trap his opponent. And considering the fact that Log was created and raised and trained by Orochimaru, you gotta assume that basically everything Log can do stems from Orochimaru in some way or another. I mean, once again, he's literally Orochimaru's clone. But speaking of people who probably should attribute the majority of their strength to Orochimaru, coming up at our number 7 spot, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Danzo. Danzo, Nick? Yeah, Danzo. Remember that right arm filled with Sharingan that Danzo's got? Well, he got that right arm from Orochimaru, who got it from Shin Uchiha. And while Danzo was the one responsible for stuffing that right arm full of Sharingan and stuffing the right side of his face with Shisui's Koto Matsukame, Danzo wouldn't have been able to do any of that without Orochimaru and Shin Uchiha. See, because Shin Uchiha has a specific, possibly bloodline restricted trait that allows for his body to receive any kind of foreign material and accept it immediately. And while usually, in fact, I think literally every single time, what's grafted onto Shin Uchiha's body, or Danzo's body through the extension of Shin Uchiha, is a Sharingan, you could literally graft anything from anybody's body onto Shin Uchiha, and his body would accept it immediately. And thus Danzo, because he wanted to get his hands on 17 or so Sharingan, decided that the only way to be able to do that would be to take one of Shin Uchiha's arms. Orochimaru, probably because he wanted Danzo to owe him something, decided to give Danzo Shin Uchiha's right arm. And therefore, without Orochimaru, Danzo wouldn't have been able to use Izanagi 17 times in his battle against Sasuke. He wouldn't have been able to graft Hashirama's cells onto his right arm to combine the power of Indra and Ashura's reincarnation to use Izanagi for a longer time frame. And thus, in his battle against Sasuke, he would have died much earlier. However, because of Orochimaru, he became probably the most competent user of Izanagi we've ever seen, outside of like maybe Obito. And even that's kind of a stretch. Danzo might have been better at it than Obito. And while in the long haul it doesn't help Danzo all that much because Sasuke is still able to kill him eventually, this contribution by Orochimaru to Danzo's strength did make him noticeably stronger. And as Danzo's probably the strongest person we've talked about on this list thus far, I think he's deserving of the number 7 spot. But did Orochimaru give him access to a Kekkei Genkai that was believed to be lost? No. I mean, like, well, maybe on account of the fact that Danzo did graft Hashirama's cells to his right arm, but that's besides the point. Anyways, coming up at our number 6 spot, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Yamato, also known as the only survivor in Orochimaru's attempts to recreate wood release. See, because while Yamato may not be nearly as proficient a wood release user as his predecessor Hashirama, he was the only child out of 70 or so to be able to survive the experimentation done on them by Orochimaru and come out the other side a wood release user. And as a wood release user, Yamato was not only incredibly important in the training of Naruto to use Kurama Kurama's chakra, as he, and basically he alone, was able to suppress Kurama's chakra when it began to boil out of Naruto, but also, even though he didn't reach up to the level of Hashirama, was an incredibly competent, and still is an incredibly competent wood release user, being able to use things like the wooden dome jutsu, which can reflect ridiculously powerful offensive ninjutsu, being able to create wooden shields that can rebuild themselves, growing trees out of his arms to impale or entangle enemies, building binding trees around enemies that cease their motions and slowly but surely crush them to death, or even going so far as to use the strongest version of Shadow Clone, Wood Clone, which he's not only able to track the location of, but also communicate with from far distances away because they're made from his cells. In fact, Yamato can even turn a Wood Clone into a seed, plant that seed on somebody, and track exactly where they're gonna go using this same technology. I guess technology is probably not the right word, but you get it. Not to mention the fact that Yamato has shown the ability to erect houses for people to stay in overnight while out on ninja missions, and rebuild entire rows of houses when Konoha inevitably gets destroyed in its 10-year cycle. And therefore, while he may not be at the level of the first Hokage, he is a uniquely powerful ninja on account of the fact of the wood release that Orochimaru gave him. And without him, Naruto probably never would have mastered a lot of the jutsus that he trained in, because it was Yamato who's responsible for tamping down the chakra of Kurama every single time it boiled out of Naruto. But is he a dragon? Great question, terrible segue. He's not? Okay, well then he can't be our number 5 spot, because coming up at number 5 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Kabuto. Now, is this a contentious entry? The answer is yes, because Kabuto isn't really one of Orochimaru's human experiments. Kabuto is his own human experiment. See, Orochimaru never experiments on Kabuto. Kabuto is a spy and a right-hand man for Orochimaru, who's responsible for being undercover in Konoha to tell Orochimaru about all the movings and shakings of the village hidden in the leaves. But so far as we know, Orochimaru never experiments on Kabuto. Orochimaru sees the promise in Kabuto and probably teaches him some of the medical ninjutsu that Kabuto has perfected in order to become a highly dangerous ninja. But so far as we know, Kabuto himself is never experimented on by Orochimaru. Yes, Kabuto does a lot of the experimenting for Orochimaru, but he's never really the subject of Orochimaru's experiments, to the degree that Kabuto doesn't even have a curse seal from Orochimaru. And why would he need one? Without the curse seal, he was strong enough to take on Tsunade. Tie that into the fact that he's a genius on par with Orochimaru, and you get a character who, after Orochimaru is killed by Sasuke, uses Orochimaru's flesh to basically become Orochimaru. And thus, in this sense, Orochimaru is experimenting on Kabuto, because Kabuto is experimenting on Kabuto with Orochimaru. On top of this, Kabuto uses literally every single scientific finding Orochimaru has ever found to boost himself in strength. That is to say that Kabuto finds a way to reverse engineer the chakra abundance of Karin and implant it on himself. He reverse engineers Jugo's ability to passively pull in nature energy and implants it on himself. He takes Suigetsu's hydrification technique, Kimimaro Shikatsu Myaku, Tayuya's sound-based genjutsu, Sakon and Ukon's ability to break down his body on a molecular level, and to even go so far as to train in Ryuchi Cave with a great white snake sage, becoming what he calls a dragon sage, gaining the ability to breathe life into inanimate objects, something that even Orochimaru was unable to do. And thus, while Kabuto does all the experimenting on himself, by himself, he does use all the findings of Orochimaru, and therefore I'd like to consider him a human experiment done by Orochimaru. But because Kabuto does all of his own augmenting, he's gonna have to stay down there at a number 5 spot. On top of the fact that he's probably, from this moment on, the weakest person we're gonna talk about. Especially because, coming up at number 4 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Shin Uchiha. Oh, and yet Kabuto's stronger than Shin Uchiha. Yeah, no, probably not. He literally injured both adult Naruto and adult Sasuke and went toe-to-toe with adult Sakura. Him versus, like, a live Madara is a good fight. Anyways, well, yes, like we've already talked about in this video, Shin Uchiha was born with the genetic makeup that would allow for him to accept any foreign material onto his body without rejection, allowing him to make use out of any genetic modification to the fullest of its abilities. He wasn't born with the Mangekyo Sharingan, or like 40 other Sharingan. Nope, those were all given to him by Orochimaru, who after the events of Naruto and Naruto Shippuden not only found a way to create Sharingan, but also apparently a way to create Mangekyo Sharingan. And apparently, having lost interest in having the Sharingan themselves, Orochimaru decided to implant all these Sharingan into Shin. And obviously those Sharingan gave Shin extrasensory perception, increased his speed, his reaction time, allowed for Shin to track chakra, and an account of fact that he had like 17 scattered all throughout his body, basically have 360-degree vision. Shin's Mangekyo Sharingan not only granted him the ability to use space-time ninjutsu, creating a portal that allowed for Shin to teleport not only himself, but also anything around him to whatever location he pleases, but also also granted him the ability to telekinetically control anything he marked with his left hand, which was usually just like hundreds, if not thousands of blades that he could use to do everything, like replace the arm that was cut off him and given to Danzo, to, you know, just attack somebody from super far away with like hundreds, if not thousands of blades. But it could go much further than just manipulating blades. Anything marked by Shin's left hand, he could telekinetically control. Even massive structures, like entire buildings. And all of that, every single one of those abilities ties its roots back to the fact that Orochimaru was able to figure out how to make a Mangekyo Sharingan and slapped it into his right eye. So for that and the fact that he was able to battle against Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura all at the peak of their strengths, yeah, we're gonna have to go and give Shin the number 4 spot. But even Shin doesn't compare to our number 3 spot, on account of the fact that our number 3 spot was the person to defeat Shin, because coming up at number 3 on our list, ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Sasuke. Listen, while we don't know exactly how much of Sasuke's strength to credit to Orochimaru, it's undeniable that Sasuke didn't see a massive pickup in his strength while hanging out with Orochimaru. Because, well, yes, Sasuke didn't unlock his Mangekyo Sharingan, or his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan until after Orochimaru was dead and gone, and Sasuke swapped out Orochimaru for Obito, but the curse seal on Sasuke allowed him to achieve some other things that otherwise he probably wouldn't have been able to, like defeating Naruto in Sasuke and Naruto's first Valley of the End fight, something that Sasuke wouldn't have even sniffed at if he didn't have the Onyx Chidori and flight ability granted by the version 2 of his curse mark. Not to mention that Sasuke would have been absolutely eviscerated by Datara C0 if he didn't have the strength, speed, and endurance boost of the curse seal and the ability to summon Manda, something he wouldn't have had without Orochimaru. Ties into the fact that Sasuke probably learned Kirin from Orochimaru, we can't say. He at least learned it while hanging out with Orochimaru, and that Kirin was basically the only thing that made him an equal opponent to Itachi, even though Itachi wasn't trying to kill him. And Orochimaru was responsible for giving Sasuke his Kusanagi blade, which is now in the possession of Boruto, and is also probably responsible for teaching Sasuke how to apply his Chidori to said Kusanagi blade. All things that he still uses to this day. You know, minus the curse seal, of course. And thus, without Orochimaru, Sasuke would be dead, like, several times over. And considering the fact that even the Sasuke who battled against Itachi, who's one of the strongest characters we've seen in Naruto, I think he's pretty deserving of this number 3 spot. At the end of the day, Sasuke was able to shake off the binds that Orochimaru held on his life. Not only killing Orochimaru, but also freeing himself of the curse seal that Orochimaru placed on him. Something that our number 2 spot most likely would never want to do, and most likely never will do, because coming up at number 2 on our list of ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have Mitsuki. See, Mitsuki, like Log, is a clone of Orochimaru, and therefore wouldn't exist without Orochimaru. He was also born, or I guess made, uniquely powerful on account of the fact that he is a clone of one of the most powerful ninja of all time. However, unlike Log, Mitsuki also seemingly has access to all of Orochimaru's most iconic jutsu, like Wind-style breakthrough, snake lightning, the ability to fire out snakes from his long sleeves, and the ability to stretch all of his limbs and wrap up opponents with them. At the end of the day, Mitsuki is kind of a mini Orochimaru, minus the, desire to dissect human beings. However, Mitsuki does surpass his parent in one way, and that is the fact that Mitsuki was specifically designed to become a perfect snake sage, something that he was able to achieve, and something that Orochimaru was never able to achieve. Throw in the fact that Mitsuki has displayed strength feats that allowed for him to knock out a surprised Kawaki before he got all of his upgrades, go toe-to-toe with the likes of Shinki, who's probably gonna be the next Kazekage, and pressure a post-time skip Boruto, as Mitsuki believed he was pursuing the man who killed Naruto. We're still not entirely sure of the level of strength that Mitsuki holds on to, on account of the fact that in his first real post-time skip battle, which was against Ryu, he was hampered by the fact that Ryu took all of his friends hostage, but it's probably safe to assume that in a 1v1 battle between perfected Snake Sage mode Mitsuki and Ryu, Mitsuki would have came out victorious. But however, what's the copy when compared to the original? Because coming up at number 1 on our list of ranking every single one of Orochimaru's human experiments, we have, well, Orochimaru. Hate on Orochimaru as you will, and it's probably justified. You can't say that they weren't willing to experiment on themselves alongside all of the other humans they were massacring to try and further science. Because I'll tell you right now, Orochimaru almost definitely was not born a person who is able to fire a snake body that's their true form out of their body whenever it gets critically injured. Tie that into the fact that Orochimaru's kind of cracked the code on immortality by being able to swap their consciousness into a new body every 3 years, which they no longer have to do because the body they're currently inhabiting is a white Zetsu, which has no will of its own and also is immortal on account of the fact that it's made entirely from Hashirama cells, and then thus on account of the fact that A, this Orochimaru was brought back to life using Kabuto's flesh, and B, the vessel that Orochimaru was able to swap their consciousness over to after cutting open the belly of the Shinigami was a white Zetsu, means that A, this iteration of Orochimaru is immortal, B, it has wood release, and C, it has all of the abilities of Dragon Sage Kabuto. So everything that Orochimaru has ever done is currently uploaded into their current body, making Orochimaru by far and away the perfected form of all of their scientific endeavors over the last 50 or so years. And for that reason, and so many others, Orochimaru is probably the most powerful human experiment they've ever created. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you believe to be Orochimaru's strongest ever scientific breakthrough, be it human experimentation or jutsu? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's gonna be rainy for a week in LA, so I'm probably gonna be sad playing video games.